couple of things on his mind besides us, so bear with him. Just like a quick intro, Keiron kindly volunteered to do this talk with me last week. But he's been here lots of times, was downstairs. I don't know if you've noticed, you should have hopefully have seen the display by the Queen Alexandra Royal Army Nursing Corps. And Keiron here, I should say, get it correct, Lieutenant Colonel retired, yes. Keiron Spires, Curator of that said Queen Alexandra collection, giving us a talk on military ancestry. Thank you, sir. Over to you.
Thank you. So my exhibition's been downstairs all summer. I'm taking it away today. So if you want to have a look at it and ask questions, do it today, because this afternoon it will be gone. So yeah, I am the curator of that collection. That what's on exhibition downstairs is a very small part of a much bigger collection that we own, and that in the main is in Robertson House, which is just inside the gates there to the Royal Academy across the road, and that's where the headquarters is based. Of course, the QAs no longer exist because last year they were disbanded. And the nurses, doctors and dentists have all amalgamated into one single entity called the Royal Army Medical Services. So there are no longer any cap-badged nurses. So, just a bit of context then. So, yes, I am a retired Lieutenant Colonel. My own background is I joined the military at 16 and was a boy soldier down the road at Mitchett, and then did my nurse training. And I was a nurse for many, many years as a regular. And then when I got married, I left the regulars and went into the reserve, which actually I saw more active service in the reserve than I did in the regulars, and eventually retired. But when I left the regulars and went in the reserve, I also switched from clinical nursing into education. And I have a doctorate, a PhD in the history of military nursing. So that's my thing. And I speak at conferences all around the world, publish, etc. So I just said I'm off to Belgium in November. So they've asked me to speak at a conference there, and they are going to, they're going to name a street in a town in Belgium after an army nurse that died there in 1919. So they've asked me to go and be part of that celebration and to talk at their conference, and then on the Sunday they're going to do a remembrance service at her grave. So that's my background and where I come from. So all the time I'm actually asked for help in tracing people's military ancestors. Now my speciality obviously is nurses, but I get asked by people all the time to trace particularly their grandfathers or great-grandfathers back in the First World War, which is actually the hardest thing to do because most of those records were destroyed in the Blitz. So we have so few records for the men who served. Actually, we have almost a complete record of the nurses who served in the First World War. So that's quite handy for me as a researcher. My special interest actually goes further back to the Boer War, which, if any of you remember, 1899, 1902. So that was where my PhD is based. And I hold the database of all of the nurses who served in South Africa. So people often contact me to say, you know, I had an ancestor and she was in South Africa, was she an army nurse, and all that sort of stuff. And I do my very best, obviously, to help people with their research. I do it for them if they aren't able to do it themselves. But what I do try to do is to point them at places they can go and look. Now, tracing your military ancestors is a bit of a crossover between military history and family history. And what I'd like to share with you this lunchtime is a little conundrum that came my way, and to see if together we can solve it. So you can see how it actually works when I get these kind of queries coming through. So this is what I call the curious case of Mary Rutherford Ives. Now, I've got 20 of these, he says. So if you can sort of pass them round, and as long as you can see over one, we'll be all right. So we might need to share them out, perhaps one between two. Keep going, keep going. Yeah, so if you get a bit thin, we might have to share them round a bit. Now, you might be a bit concerned about the print on the front page. The print on the front page is a newspaper cutting, but I did transcribe it for you on the second page. Because I know we might have some issues with reading small print. Ooh, doing all right. Extras. Does anybody else want one?
I'm missing here.
Have you all got sight of one? Sight of one? Sight of one? Anybody else want one? Okay. So just to give you the context then, a family contacted me from America, and that's again quite common for me to get queries from Canada, Australia, America. And somebody's doing their family history, and there is a story in the family, and I call them all stories because we all know that sometimes over the years the stories perhaps get a little altered. The family story is that this lady, Mary Rutherford Ives, served in the Boer War and was given the Victoria Cross. Okay, that's their family story. The person doing their family history was a bit unsure about the veracity of that, and so he sent me these newspaper articles to say, could I look at these and tell him what I thought? Okay, so that's our start point really. Now, lots of things you can read in this newspaper article, you don't need to be an expert in military history to start to raise some questions. So if you look at the second page, which is where I've transcribed it, it'll be a lot easier to read. So there's a longer newspaper article and a very short one at the bottom. So even as you're reading it, is there anything as you're reading it you think you would like to question? We're going to test your knowledge of history now, or maybe even geography. I've got one as soon as I read the first paragraph. It says, she wore a little silver pin, inscribed for valour. Does anybody know what the Victoria Cross is made out of? Gunmetal, yeah, from the guns from the Crimea. So if it was a Victoria Cross, it wouldn't be silver. So there's my first paragraph, my first question. Now, sadly, I didn't get to see the real thing. I've got a photograph, but I couldn't see the real thing, so I do not know whether it was made out of silver or a silver metal or whatever. And then second paragraph, it says that Mrs. Ives was born Mary Rutherford in the little Scottish town of Rutherford's Cross. Do we have any Scots in the room? Has anybody ever heard of Rutherford's Cross? No. I doubt if you will, because it doesn't exist. So that was quite interesting, and I was questioning it anyway because it was named for the family, and her father was minister there and her father had been before him, which does not ring true to me anyway. In terms of social history, family history, a town called Rutherford Cross would have been called Rutherford Cross a long time before these generations, you know what I mean? So I've searched high and low on every map I can find of Scotland, and I can find no trace of Rutherford's Cross. So that was interesting. So after schooling, she went to London for final training at the nursing school Florence Nightingale founded when she returned from the Crimea. Do you know where that nursing school is? Where was Florence Nightingale? St Thomas's. So Florence Nightingale set up the Nightingale School of Nursing at St Thomas's. Now they keep exceptionally good records, exceptionally good. So it's always very easy to trace what they call a nightingale. So the nurses that were trained there call themselves nightingales. And not surprising, she's not in any of their records. So when the Boer War broke out, Miss Rutherford volunteered at once and went out to the Transvaal. Right, the Boer War. What was the Boer War? A war between who?
The Dutch settlers in England.
The Dutch settlers were called
Boers.
Boers, okay. And who was fighting them? The British Empire. Because it wasn't just the English. We had all sorts out there. But the British Empire versus the Boers. Now, South Africa at that point was a number of different states. It wasn't an integrated whole. Do you know which states the Boers lived in? Orange Free and the Transvaal. Okay, so according to this, she went out to South Africa and went to the Boer half of the war, not the British part. So if she was going to support the British, she'd have been in the Cape or in Natal, because those were the two British states. So that doesn't sound right to me either. Somebody who doesn't understand either history or geography. She served there for 4 years. So the Boer War, we've already said, somebody told me, it was 1899 to 1902. By my maths, that's 3 years, not 4. Okay? Now, to be fair, at the end of the Boer War, when the war finished, obviously there was a huge amount of Empire troops stationed in South Africa, and they can't ship them all home the next day. So it did take a long time to draw down the armies that were in South Africa and to set up some garrisons that were going to remain in South Africa. So there were quite a lot of nurses in South Africa for quite a long time. But in 1902, at the end of the Boer War, there was a huge reorganisation of the whole of the army because bits of it didn't work very well. And so they took the opportunity to sort it all out, fortunately, just in time for the First World War. One of the things they looked at was medical and nursing support. And in 1902, they formed the Queen Alexandra's Imperial Military Nursing Service. And any army nurse at that time transferred in to the Queen Alexandra's Imperial Military Nursing Service. And all of those transfers were notified. Do you know where they get notified, things like that? Were those sorts of occurrences where you can find them? They're all in the London Gazette. So the London Gazette is a fabulous resource for finding out about military ancestors, okay? So all the commissioning and all that sort of stuff, it's all in the London Gazette. So I'm in there. 2006, I was awarded an honour in the New Year's Honours List. It's in the London Gazette. That's where you find all of those things, including the Victoria Cross, by the way. If you want to find out who's ever been awarded a Victoria Cross, you search the London Gazette, because they're all in there. She's not. So, if she'd have stayed 4 years, she should have transferred from whatever she was in into the Queen Alexandra's Imperial Military Nursing Service, and there is no entry for her in the London Gazette. And I've tried different versions. Obviously, she wasn't called Mary Rutherford Ives at that point because she wasn't married. So we're assuming Mary Rutherford, but I've tried all sorts of variations and I cannot find this lady in the London Gazette. So she returned to England and found out that she'd been singled out for decoration. Soon afterwards, on a trip to the United States, which I can't find either, she met and married Arthur W. Ives. Now that is a fact. So that's the first fact I've come across in this newspaper article, right? Now that we can prove that she did marry this guy in America. And he worked for the American Express Company. That's fine. Happy with that. That bit's okay. And they lived in various places. That's okay. And they settled down and lived in this place called White Plains in New York State. You do? We should pop in and say hello. The family's still there, apparently. Is that where the head office IBM is now?
Yeah.
Ah.
IBM World Trade.
Oh, okay. Right, what else we're going to pick out from here? Now there was one bit which I've skipped over, I think. Let's have a look. Da, 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 da. Maybe I didn't transcribe it. That would be sad. Right, let me look at the original. Somewhere it does say, oh yes. Oh, there's a paragraph. Oh yes, right. So it does say in that very first paragraph, or the second paragraph actually, Queen Victoria awarded England's most committed military decoration to Mrs. Ives for general service in the Boer War. So, we know from what else is in here that she was in South Africa for 4 years. So she came back from South Africa, by my maths, in 1903. Does anybody know when Queen Victoria died? So a little bit of a problem there too. So the dead Queen gave her an award. So actually, if she had any award, who would it have come from? King, the King, yeah. And actually we know because the nurses, well, everybody actually, in the Boer War, they were awarded the Queen's South Africa Medal as a campaign medal, including all the nurses, and a record was kept of all of those. They're called the medal rolls, and they're at Kew in the National Archive. So I've been to Kew, and I have transcribed all of the medal rolls for nurses. So I've transcribed 2,000 records as part of my research. And what I did for my research was I found all these ladies, because they are all ladies, on the medal rolls, and then I put them into a database, and then I also looked for these nurses on the census, for example, everywhere, in newspapers, everything, and built up a little mini family history for as many of them as I could, which wasn't all of them by any means. But it did allow me to find out, for example, what the average age of the nurses were in South Africa, what their social class was, where they trained, what hospitals they trained in, and so on. So I can honestly say I know an awful lot about those nurses that went to South Africa. Some of them went as army nurses. Some of them volunteered their services either in England and went, or they pitched up in South Africa and said, "Hi, I'm a nurse, can I help you?" Most of those were sent away, thankfully. And there were lots of ladies. It was very fashionable, apparently, to take the ship down to Cape and have lots of parties and entertain and all that sort of stuff, until Queen Victoria sent a telegram to say, for God's sake, send those ladies home. And they did. Because there's lots of accounts in the records of these ladies, and they were ladies, going to South Africa, visiting a hospital, you know, wanting to wash everybody, and the soldiers would say, "Yeah, but you're the 11th person who wants to wash me today," you know. Or feeding buns and cakes to patients that had enteric fever and shouldn't really be eating at all, you know, that sort of stuff. The doctors were getting absolutely fed up with it all, and in the end Queen Victoria stepped in and said, "Get these ladies home." So some of the nurses came out with the army, some were already in South Africa and worked in army hospitals, some came out and volunteered, and as long as we could prove their nursing qualifications, they were taken on and worked in army hospitals. So there are extremely good records for all of that nursing that happened in the Boer War, and for love nor money I cannot find this lady anywhere. So that's quite interesting. So looking at this is a genuine newspaper cutting. This in itself is genuine. This is the obituary that was written for this lady. But as you can see, even reading it on first glance, I just had so many flags popping up. So I did do all of those checks. I did look at all of the Florence Nightingale nurses. I looked through every database I've got of nurses who went to South Africa, the shipping lists of people going to South Africa and all of that, and can find no trace of this lady at all in anything to do with military nursing. So I personally do not believe she was ever a military nurse. I do not believe she was ever in South Africa. What we've found from the obituary, but also from other sources, that she was probably born about 1860. So by the time of the Boer War, she was already getting on a bit, but then quite a lot of the nurses were. So she'd have been about 39, 40 by the time the Boer War started. When you look at her death and the family at that point, because she appears in the census in America, she had a grown-up family, which means that she must have had a family at the time of the Boer War. So she couldn't possibly have been a volunteer nurse going out. So that's the sort of thing I get, tracing your military ancestor. Now this one, I would say, is definitely not a military ancestor. More often than not, I can find things to help people in their research. Sometimes it's lots, and I can almost write a little story for people about all sorts of things that I've discovered. And I always put all the references in for where I found what I found, so they can go back and look for themselves. Sometimes I can find very little, and that's because lots of records were destroyed, and there's just nothing. Sometimes it's because the family actually don't know very much themselves. One of the issues I find both with men and with women, and I'm sure it might even be in this audience today, people don't use their name. I've married someone like that. My wife is called Catherine Allison, and she gets so cross if anybody calls her Catherine. She's been Allison since the day she was teeny tiny. So if I look through the records for Keiron Spires, or Catherine Locke as she was, I probably wouldn't find her. But I would if I looked for Allison. But how do I know that she called herself Allison? I have no idea. Simple names like Elizabeth, when I look through the records, is she Elizabeth? Is she Liz? Is she Beth? Is she Bessie? I think I worked out there's about 12 variations on Elizabeth. What did she call herself? Lots of people use their middle name as the name they wish to be known by. And so it's very hard then to track people if the family aren't aware of that. If the family don't know their date of birth, for example, that makes it very difficult. I can find 100,000 George Smiths serving in the World War. But which one is it that you're after? You know, a date of birth really narrows it down. So it's those things really. So when I go back to families and I say, look, have you got any of these details that will actually fix a person in the history? If they have, that's great. If they haven't, then it's going to be very, very difficult to find anything. I do find sometimes, nurses particularly, they say, oh no, she's an army nurse. And I have to say, no, she wasn't actually. She was a Red Cross VAD. And some people find that disappointing. I don't think they should. The Red Cross VADs served alongside the army nurses in France. So why should they be disappointed? But, you know, I will tell them the truth. They were not an army nurse. They were a Red Cross VAD. Because it means their records are in a different place. So it is always interesting. It's fun. I'm very happy to take on challenges if you want to give them to me. Right, the second thing then is they sent me a photograph of the badge that she used to wear. Okay? It's interesting, in the newspaper article, it says she was reticent to talk about it, which I'm not surprised. So on the back is a Victoria Cross. So you can see that there are similarities. And people who don't know military history could be, you know, could take that as being a Victoria Cross. The Victoria Cross is distinctive. But the Victoria Cross is also a medal, which means it comes on a hanger. That's what we call this, because it's designed to be hung on a uniform. It's not designed to be worn as a brooch. It's not jewellery. Now, so obviously, some of the honours, higher honours, which is probably can't get much higher for bravery than Victoria Cross, but if you're a Major Dame Commander of the British Empire or something, lucky people, then you can get an award which you can wear in a brooch-like fashion if you were a lady. But the Victoria Cross is a medal. It's designed to be worn on a uniform. So I look at this one. This is obviously something that's been designed to be worn as a brooch. That is definitely a brooch, isn't it? It's not a medal. So it's in the shape of a Victoria Cross. It's got the lion. It does say, you probably can't quite make it out, it's not a brilliant photograph, but at the bottom it does say for valour. And it is spelt in the English fashion, because the Americans, you know, the Americans don't really like English. So they've lost the U out of valour. But that's spelt the English way. But really, there isn't really much comparison between the picture of the brooch and a true Victoria Cross. So I don't know whether we can only assume that a jeweller made up a brooch in that way. Also, the Victoria Cross is a very special award, and it's only made under certain circumstances. And you can see at the top, it's awarded for the most conspicuous bravery or some daring or preeminent act of valour or self-sacrifice or extreme devotion to duty. But the most important thing there is it's in the presence of the enemy. And that's why no nurse has ever been awarded the Victoria Cross. Because nurses don't go down in the trenches leaping across no man's land. It's not what they do. There are nurses that have been awarded gallantry awards. The military medal is what the nurses get for gallantry. First World War, none in the Boer War, because it wasn't seen as a thing in the Boer War, but certainly by the First World War, nurses started to be awarded the military medal for gallantry, because they were very brave, but it was usually when they were being shelled or when their hospital was bombed, for example, and they were very brave in looking after their patients and, you know, sorting things out, which is great, and they deserve their awards. But it's not in the presence of the enemy. You have to be face to face with the enemy in order to get a Victoria Cross. So it's very, very specific. So it really wasn't that hard to look at this article and say, no, it isn't true. It is not true.
What sources of information whoever wrote that article must have looked at some sources of information? Would it have been
No.
more mouth-to-mouth?
Family, yeah, the family.
Yeah.
So I think this lady's grandson gave that interview to the newspaper, repeating what he'd been told by his grandmother, you know, so it's a family story.
Yeah.
And that's how family history is generated in many ways, you know. And it's not until you go back and you really, really look at something that you can see, you know, is that a story or is there any truth in it? And in this newspaper article, the only bit of truth I could find was that she married Arthur H. Ives. And she lived in White Plains, New York, because that's in the census, you know, that's very public. Nothing else in here could I find that I could...
So the actual writer of the article never really validated anything, really?
Yeah. No, the reporters.
Yeah.
There's nothing from her personal sort of
No.
thing into
No.
look who I am. Sort of
Yep.
thing, you know,
Got no diaries or letters and stuff like that, you know, and sometimes we can find those, and they're great. We can find diaries and letters and stuff. It really helps to validate.
To be sorted out. Who did actually that come from? Was it obviously a grandchild or something? From the
I think it's probably 4 generations down, so probably a great-great-great-grandson, who was obviously trying to do the family history and wasn't sure whether they should put this in as a whatever. So,
I'm intrigued to know how you responded.
well, how do you think I should respond?
Gently. Yes. Truthfully.
show no sign of
Okay.
etc. etc.
Let's leave the dogs lie.
Let's assume the dog's light. Okay, well, historians, good historians, will follow a code of ethics. Okay? We have to remember when we're doing history, and particularly the sort of history I do, I might find things which are unknown to families. So also, the people that I write about are no longer with us. They do not have the right to challenge what I'm saying. So there is a code of ethics. Not all historians follow it, but there is one. So from my point of view, I've got 4 choices here. I could just say, I'm sorry, but I can't find any information about her, which is truthful because I didn't. Or I could say, I cannot verify the information in this article, which is also truthful, but doesn't actually tell them it's wrong. I could just say that the information in the article is a fabrication, which is a bit harsh, but also true. Or I could offer to help find the truth. Now, which of those do you think the family wanted or would have liked of those? I mean, as you say, I could let sleeping dogs lie. I could just say, I'm sorry, I can't help you with this. You know, I'm not able to find any information that you know, I could do that. That's the easy way out from my point of view.
But it would perpetuate the story, wouldn't it?
Sorry?
Wouldn't the members of the family have the medal?
They have the badge.
Oh, that's the
I
one.
mean, that's a forgery, isn't it? It looks so much like a Victoria Cross.
Well-
It's almost deliberately a forgery.
Well, that's where we have to be super careful, because is it a forgery? No, not really. It's very like, but it's not. I don't think it's an attempt to copy it. Whoever made that brooch didn't have a Victoria Cross in front of them when they were doing it, for sure.
Let's say 4 back.
The
He does.
lion's backside is totally different.
Yeah.
Pretty poorly made, really.
Yeah.
If it was designed to be a copy, it's not a very good one.
No.
There's a chap on the antique brochure
Yeah.
that knows his stuff.
Yep.
If you were to ask him about the Victoria Cross,
Yeah.
there probably wouldn't be anything that he didn't know.
No,
And when
and-
he's interviewing the family that
Which is
brought
exactly
them
what I
to the
did.
show,
So,
he's so precise, it's amazing.
yeah, well, my own networks are like that. So I reached out to my own networks
Yeah.
and showed people like that
Yeah.
the image of the badge, and they all came back to me and said, there's no
Yeah.
way in hell that's the Victoria Cross. Which is my thought. So I know that this is, I wouldn't call it a fabrication, because that would be a bit unfair, because the reporter writing this didn't make it up. And I'm sure the relative telling the reporter didn't make it up either. So a fabrication would be a bit harsh to say that.
Mary made it up.
Mary clearly made it up. But what we don't know is why. And we never will. We never will, because you can't put yourself as a historian in the brain of somebody who's passed away. Some do, and it really makes me cross when I hear, listen to historians saying, well, he thought that and she thought this, and I thought, you have no idea. You were not there. How can you work out what somebody thought? So those are my choices. So, yes, I think the easy one is just to say, I can't, substantiate this, and you can make of it what you will. But I actually chose the last option, which was to help the family find the actual truth, because without that, they'll never get their family tree sorted out. And it was hard, because this lady died in America and lived in America for 25 years. The American records are much more difficult to navigate than the UK ones, and of course they're much larger. It's a much bigger data set than we've got here in the UK. So what I do know now, I didn't at the time, was this lady did go to the States from Scotland. I've got no idea where from. And she married a guy in America whose surname was Taylor and had a child with him. He died, and she was a widow. Arthur H. Ives was already married and had children. His wife was very, very sick. And so Mary, Taylor as she was then, looked after his dying wife. Okay, so maybe that's where this nursing thing came from. And when she died, Arthur became a widower. And at some point, widower and widow married, and they became the happy couple living in White Plains, New York. Now that I can find by working backwards through the censuses, which is not easy to do. But as I was doing it, I could show the family what I was looking at and why things don't add up, because you can look at the age of children and their birth dates. It's quite common, for example, to find children, when you look at how old a child is and you calculate that back from the date of the wedding, it's very clear that quite often weddings happen post-conception. Happens far more often than people imagine. Maybe that's the reason for the wedding, but in days gone past it would have been a reason for a wedding, wouldn't it? So what we don't know, well, so what we do know is she went to America, she found somebody, she fell in love, got married, had a child, he died, she looked after somebody else's dying wife, she died and she married the widower. And then they carried on in White Plains for the next 25 years.
Her child died or her husband died?
Her husband died.
So there was another child?
There is. There's a child from the first marriage called Mabel, and there are 4 children from the second marriage. But when I looked at the ages of the children, they predate the marriage of Arthur and Mary. So I know that they are Arthur's children, not Mary's. So she married in and took over that family. What we'll never know is where this story comes from, or even why it exists. Why did Mary feel the need to have a badge? I mean, that's a lot to go, isn't it? It's not just a story. She had the badge made and everything. That's an awful lot of effort to make to create this kind of persona. I understand about calling herself a nurse because not until 1922 was the word nurse became a registered qualification. So you can no longer call yourself a nurse. You're not allowed to in law, unless you are one, the same as you can't call yourself a solicitor or whatever. But it's quite recent. So in days gone past, or years gone past, you could call yourself a nurse if you were involved in nursing, which meant looking after sick people. So maybe she did call herself a nurse because she was nursing. But where this backstory comes from, I have no idea at all. And we'll never know. But that's the joy of doing this kind of research, really. I mean, this is probably the hardest one I've ever had to do, and the hardest dealings I've ever had with another family. Because normally when I'm dealing with a family, often I have to disappoint and say, I can't get any further than this. This is as far as I can go. But it's not often that I have to say, I'm really sorry, but this story is not true for all sorts of different reasons.
What was the family's reaction when they found out?
I think they suspected anyway, which is why they asked me. And I think anybody who's got any kind of reasonable knowledge could work out some of the things that we did. It can't be Queen Victoria, it would have been King Edward. No nurses had a Victoria Cross because they're very specific. They could have found an image like this for themselves to say, well, actually, that's not the same as her brooch. So there are lots of things in that article they could have looked for themselves and worked out it can't quite be right. So I think if they were happy with it, they would have kept it in the family history. But by asking me to have a look at it, I think they were prepared for me to say no. And that's what happened.
It could be that they asked the question because of the oddities within the research that they were doing.
Could be.
So they obviously began to think, well, actually, that can't be.
They didn't tell me that they'd done any, other than what I would call the normal family tree, looking at the census, brothers and sisters and all that sort of stuff. So I'm not aware of them doing anything further than that.
Did you also find out where she originally came from?
No, other than Scotland.
If you know her maiden name, wouldn't that help you find her date of birth?
You would think so, but I actually haven't found Mary Rutherford. I have not found her in
Scottish
any.
records not as good as the English.
They are, but then I'm not convinced her name was ever Mary Rutherford. So I don't know. It's I mean, yes, I did look for her birth.
Did you ever lose heart with halfway through your...
No, I don't lose heart. I mean, I was sad when I read this actually because I don't.
You wanted to complete the...
Well, I'm sad that I don't like to have to go back to a family to say what you think is definitely not true. That's a shame. I mean, it's disappointing if I have to say I can't help you, but that wasn't the case with this. I could help, but not in the way they expected.
Since it's pretty unlikely that she made the batch herself, is there a possibility that some other well-meaning organisation that she was associated with that thought they were doing a survey finding?
Well, the other thing I did was I did a badge search. So you can do that. And I just searched to see if I could see if the badge that she had belonged to another organisation. I mean, the Four Valor kind of puts me off a bit because there aren't many of those. But a badge with a Maltese cross shape and a lion might belong to some sort of sorority or whatever that she might have belonged to. But the Four Valor is very unusual to find on any badge. So I did try that.
When did that?
Sorry, hang on a minute. Well, go on.
Do they have their name on the cross?
On the Victoria Cross? Yes, they are named.
It makes you wonder if Arthur Ives was so pleased at the way Mary looked after his dying wife, he just had this made as a token.
I wondered that as well.
Well, I think we're left with so many questions about why, just why all of this. But, that's family history for you, and how it crosses across to military history. And on this occasion, I had to push it back and say this is not military. But
you can understand a situation where a guy's got a wife that's dying, somebody's nursing her, and people around them would have automatically assumed, oh no, he's got a nurse in.
Yeah.
So it begins to sort of add up in other people's eyes. In a way.
Maybe she felt she had to justify her position nursing his dying wife and made up a story to prove that she actually was a nurse, but wasn't.
I think Roger's suggestion is probably the most plausible in a way. Her husband was so pleased with her, and he had to, she's a saint almost, I don't know, it's a bit of a fantasy.
I think you're being very kind, because of course the opposite might be true. She might have been a sinner. Was she nursing his wife, or was she the cause of her demise?
Very wealthy.
And lost her own husband as well.
Yeah. I mean, these days you read it in the papers, don't you? So I hope that gives you an insight into the kind of things that I do. As I say, more often than not, I get a more happy ending than this. Although the family were still happy, but and they could shed no light onto why she may or may not have done this. And of course, time passes, and you just can't. You can't. You never have any ideas. So, any questions for me? Anything?
Just completely on the same theme, but just a quickie relative to names of deceased and so forth. We were at the Brookwood War Graves again on Sunday, and when we drove past where the memorial to the missing 1418 was, it isn't there anymore. It's been knocked down. It's being rebuilt because they found lots and lots more names that have not been registered. Since they built the museum, memorial, this was the list as they had it. They found so many more names now that have come to the fore, soldiers and military that lost their lives, that they have to build a new memorial with all these new names on.
Well, if you go to Brookwood, it's a lovely place to visit. The sad thing is that the QAs are not buried there. They are buried in the civilian part of the cemetery, and they're hidden away. You have to march through elephant grass to find the graves, and they're under this tree, and they're in very terrible condition. And we've been campaigning to try and get them moved into the Commonwealth War Graves, because the first nurses, army nurses buried there, were buried before the War Grave Commission built that plot, and they refused to move them in. So they're out there. Every other Commonwealth War Grave cemetery you visit, the nurses are in with the people that they were looking after. Not at Brookwood. At Brookwood, they're chucked under a tree in the corner. So we're not best pleased with that. Right, any other questions for me? Are you happy?
I think there's one VAD nurse, isn't there, in the Brookwood, in the military part?
That could well be.
Yeah.
But when you talk about VADs,
Another full nurse.
there might be. And that's the thing. Again, it's one of these things that's a conundrum. A VAD was part of a voluntary aid detachment, so they were called VADs. Some of them were nurses.
And my mother was a nurse out, well, she was initially in Torquay, in the American Women's War Hospital in Torquay, but then went out in March 1918, shortly after she was aged 21, and she was in the base hospital in northern France.
But even the VADs that went out to hospitals in France, for example, again, it depends on what their background was. Some of them worked as what we would call ward maids, so looking after the cleanliness and everything else, the hygiene and meals and things. Some of them were nurses, but they were employed by the Red Cross rather than by the army. So you can't tell just by somebody being a VAD what they were actually doing. But the majority of VADs were not nurses, the majority. But what is interesting is a lot of those VADs in France worked alongside the army nurses, clearly enjoyed what they were doing. When they came back from the war, they trained as nurses. We've got lots of records of that. And there's a very famous nurse. How many of you know about, talking about Victoria Crosses? Doctors that have got 2 Victoria Crosses. Do you know who that is? Chavas. So, I mean, that makes us cross as nurses, because everybody talks about Chavas because you've got 2 VCs. What they forget is he had 2 sisters. He had a lot of brothers as well, who all got gallantry awards. Amazing family. But he had sisters, and May Chavas was a VAD in the First World War. She went out to France with a hospital, worked in a hospital, came back. She trained at St Thomas's, the Nightingale School of Nursing. The Second World War, she was an army QA in the Second World War. But they forget about the sister, and they all talk about the brother.
Thank you. Right.
Happy?
It's quite an amazing talk. It sort of kept us thinking we were going to find out by some mysterious means
That it was
more or
correct.
less true.
No, it wasn't. It was more or less false. Sorry.
Yeah, you did keep us on edge all the
Oh, yeah, really great. That was
Quite amazing. So I
You're very
really
welcome.
enjoyed that.
Thank you.
I think everyone has. So
The 30th of October, Spilden had, we've got the history of the British Legion and of the Camberley branch in particular by the current chair of that organisation. That's Camberley, we'll know about that later.